At this point, we see that even though we have been sliding towards sort of this purple, bluish pattern over this 10-year period, it shows that there is still a sizable Republican vote in Arizona.
You're listening to Beyond the Ballot AZ. I'm Tom Collins, Executive Director of the Arizona Clean Elections Commission.
And I'm Gina Roberts, Voter Education Director. Today, we have a special edition of the show dedicated to Arizona's political history.
Until recently, Arizona had been seen as a Republican stronghold, especially in presidential elections. For example, in 2016, the state went for Donald Trump. But then in 2020, the state narrowly went for Joe Biden. Then in 2024, back to Donald Trump.
I think it's fair to say that the shift from consistently red to a battleground state reflects broader demographic and socioeconomic changes across the state.
And who knows what the future holds? We're talking about that and much more up next. We're here with Garrett Archer, who is a data analyst for ABC 15. You might know him as AZ Data Guru. He's a former senior data analyst with the Arizona Secretary of State. And you'll see him on ABC 15 with his trademark bow tie, talking all things numbers. Garrett, thanks for joining Beyond the Ballot AZ.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for inviting me in.
So we've established Data Guru, and one of the things that we're trying to unpack here is what data has told us about Arizona voting patterns over the last few decades. You know, what's the story behind becoming a swing state?
The journey to a swing state for Arizona really started in 2008. Obviously, John McCain won Arizona in that election, but then you had 2012 swinging, but a red state at this point. And then 2014, that was an interesting race because everyone had the same margins, and then 2016 comes around. Donald Trump changes the trajectory of the Republican Party, and all of a sudden, Arizona becomes more of a swing state. And there's always been a shift in the Republican Party in which the blue-collar vote, especially the blue-collar white vote, had been increasing over a number of years pretty steadily. Donald Trump, he really kicked that into high gear, and those numbers changed. But on the opposite end of that also accelerated a dynamic in which the Democratic Party was winning more high education, more affluent voters. And Arizona has an interesting mix of those kind of people, of both sides. And so that really, because of the fact that we are a suburban state with a pretty strong, large rural voting base as well, but also with the tribal voting base that's still very Democratic, reliably Democratic, it causes us to be this mixture of coalitions that caused us to turn into a swing state. Fast forward to 2018, you see that obviously Democrats have the ability to win races in Arizona. This is one of the first times we've seen in a long time that Democrats had pretty sizable victories over Republicans. Again with 2020. And then 2022, we're going through all these swing districts, and then all of a sudden, 2024, the shift happens again. At this point, we see that even though we have been sliding towards sort of this purple, bluish pattern over this 10-year period, it shows that there is still a sizable Republican vote in Arizona.
It seems like there's kind of a paradox for independent voters, right? Independent voters are like the second biggest voting bloc now. When you were talking about the state as a purple state, we get this perception that independents are moderates, but that's not necessarily true. But on the other hand, they do swing really hard one way or the other. And help us understand that seemingly paradox.
We think of independence as the word independence. You think, independent of Republican and Democrat, but really a better term for independence is unaffiliated. They are unaffiliated voters, and there are several reasons for that. As you said, there is a perception that they are overall more moderate, but that, again, the independent registry is very ephemeral. You have, back in 2008, when the parties had a different mix of coalitions, Republicans, for example, back in 2008, 2010, a lot of the disaffected Republicans who didn't like the Romney sort of business-style Republican Party would have registered in disgust as independents because they didn't like where the Republican Party is going. Same thing with Democrats, by the way. If there was a Democrat who thought that the party was too center-right, and they didn't like that direction, they wanted to be more liberal, they would register as an independent. And that's two large voting blocks in the independents are people who are right and left, and it shifts over time. Now, fast forward to 2024, well, that person who was otherwise disgusted with where the party was at the time in 2008 is likely no longer disgusted with the party. And so they have re-registered as Republicans. And so now you sort of have a shift. Now the independents that are right-leaning independents are probably a little bit more moderate now than they would have been like 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. Now, in the middle of this, though, because this is where you say they switch, there is a group of independents that will switch, and that's usually the more agnostic, politically agnostic, very low information, just going about their lives voters. This is why they vote at a much larger rate in presidential elections, less in midterms. And that is that one slice of the electorate that all that advertisement is going towards. They're looking for that small slice of agnostic independents. And, obviously also boost turnout on their base, but it's such a small group of independents that actually do have a history of shifting from right to left.
But with more and more people moving here, how has that affected voting patterns or will affect it?
Well, and politics is about coalition. So it's the type of person who is moving here. It's been Californians. Californians have been moving to a lower cost state. Look, I'm one of those people. I am a native Californian who relocated to Arizona because of the cost of living back in the early 2000s. When people shift to a lower cost of living state, they're going to make a decision as to where they choose to live, right? So more liberal Californians that were leaving California for cost of living would have moved to Oregon, would have moved to Seattle, would have moved to some places on the East Coast, Minnesota. More right-leaning Californians would have chosen places like Texas, Arizona, Florida. Now, again, the interesting thing with Arizona and Nevada is that you're still connected to California if you move to Nevada, Las Vegas, or Arizona, right? So, so in that way, it's less of a difficult life choice. They're not really making the choice to move here for politics, so they will bring their politics here with them. But obviously, you're going to have some people that are more center right, and I think that's what you've seen in Arizona. Is we've seen people come from California that are slightly to the right of center. They're suburbanites, and it's caused us to have this purple.
So, sometimes I think we hear a lot of talk around the process of elections being a way to change the outcomes. But what you're really hinting at, I think, is something different, which is you've got to look at the voters that are in the coalition and why they're there and what's motivating them. So how do you, when you're sitting there, being an analyst, and you hear folks describing, the electorate, do you ever think, that's not quite right?
Oh, I mean, all the time. Everybody makes generalizations about the electorate. I mean, analysts make generalizations about the electorate. Everybody does. I would say that there are sort of two coalitions, right? Like there's a primary coalition and a general coalition, and that's where this hang-up occurs, right? Because the primary coalition is going to be, in effect, different than the general coalition. And both parties are – I mean, we've seen this before. Both parties are somewhat uncomfortable about expanding that primary coalition to include people outside of where their standard doctrine is. I mean, I know that you hear a lot more noise on the Republican side being against things like the ranked choice voting, but or jungle primaries. But we've also seen that, there is a history of Democrats also being opposed to this because that adjusts their primary coalition to, again, the level of thinking of, I have outsiders choosing my candidate, because at least in a general, so say if you choose your candidate in the primary and it's someone that aligns with your party's belief. Well, if a general coalition, which is a much more expansive coalition, it will also include, again, disaffected members of your own party and the lower propensity voters, which you have no idea how they're going to do, how they're going to vote, or actually sits there and researches everything. You don't know. It's an unknown, and unknowns are frightening in politics. So, you've got this broader coalition. And so now the job is at least to try to convince that larger coalition that, hey, this person that we chose in the primary, this is the person, right? Okay, you may not like some of these, but we're going to ignore some of these policies and talk about how this person just really represents where we want to go as a party. And, that's sort of the difference there is at least, you can, as a partisan, you can sell this candidate you chose in the primary to a general election coalition, or at least try to.
10 years from now. So looking forward, Presumably, we've picked up another electoral vote, from redistricting from the census. If you had to speculate, or does the data indicate, do you think that Arizona's status as a swing state will continue?
That's very, very interesting. And the reason that's an interesting question is you have sort of twofold. Gen Z is diverging right now based very heavily on gender, right? So you have Gen Z men shifting very Republican and Gen Z women shifting Democratic. And that adds, again, a very interesting dynamic of where things are going to be in the next 10 years. The other thing is Arizona likely is not going to grow at the rate that we used to because our cost of living is mostly now on parity with other medium to large states. So there's really less of a incentive for people to move here just to buy a house because, why, right? I mean, it's $500,000 for a starter home here. So, and that again shifts where we're going to be in 10 years because we might, depending on how we grow. Are the coalitions going to shift anymore? Are we going to see like that just increase of people and the type of person that's coming here? Because right now there's not as many people coming here. And so the coalitions are somewhat frozen as to where they were in 2022. In 10 years, are the coalitions going to be, or is the type of person, not the coalitions, messing up my terminology, but is the type of person that moves to Arizona going to be the same type of person that moves here in 2032 as moved here in 2022. Again, it's difficult to know. Is it going to be is the younger person no longer going to be able to afford living here? So all we're going to see is snowbirds and people who are retiring out here. It's who knows. That's what's interesting is our destiny as a state is also shifting.
Thanks for tuning in. That's it for this special edition of Beyond the Ballot AZ. I'm Gina Roberts.
And I'm Tom Collins. We'll see you for our next episode.